in alphabetical order by surname in the first round, and then they'll be rejigged as we go along throughout the session. So the first question is going to be for Shahrar. And one thing to note is that for each of these first questions, they're going to be unique. So each candidate's going to have a different one. The candidates haven't seen any of these questions before, so it's going to be very live and dynamic, and you're going to get to hear, just see how well they respond to kind of these questions directly. So the first question, as I say, is for Shahrar. So Shahrar, this isn't the first time you stood for the leadership. 2 years ago, you stood as well. You secured 17.5% of the vote in that election. Why do you think members will have changed their minds between now and then, and will put their faith in you this time around?
Thanks, Chris. Firstly, can I say what a delight and a pleasure it is to be here, and how much I support independent media such as your good self is really a trailblazer in producing green news for us and to help inform people's votes at this election. So yes, you're absolutely right. I stood in 2018. I think I got a creditable vote there, and I think that there is grassroots support for my campaign. The main reason I'm standing ultimately is I don't feel I have a choice. And many in the party, many across the world and society are wholly aware of the climate change emergency, the ecological devastation that is literally on our doorstep. And we don't have time. Some people say that time has run out. I was at a meeting over a decade ago with Ken Livingstone, and he was asked the question, and he said, it's already too late. And maybe he was thinking about the difficulty of changing society transformationally and psychologically. But I think that as Greens, we have confidence in human beings doing better by us. And the prize is great. And for sure, the risk of failure is almost too difficult to contemplate. So in terms of politics on the ground, I feel that, and I wish to take ownership of the mistakes that we've made over the last few years. I was deputy leader 2014 to 2016, part of the leadership team when we got a record 1.1 million votes in the general election alongside Natalie Bennett. And I feel, and I'm pained and anguished by the missteps we've taken, not only the Progressive Alliance in 2017, but really recently, 2019 Lib Dem Pacts. And I feel that whilst, I take ownership also collectively of what the party did, they weren't decisions that I was taking strategically. I argued against them at conference. I didn't support them. And I think right now you need a change in leadership, because I don't have those decisions as a liability upon my shoulders. I have always said that Greens should be proud and vocal about radical, transformational and social change. And that's why I'll be leading, not just on the climate and ecological emergency, but social justice. And the two are, of course, inextricably bound up. And I hope there'll be plenty of opportunity for me to explain why I am committed to this project for the Green Party. And I'd be honoured to serve you were you to put your faith and confidence in me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shahrar. So our second opening question goes to Sian. So Sian, you've been co-leader for 2 years, during which time you led the party through last year's general election, where the party received no additional parliamentary representation. Why should members re-elect you on your record?
I think we've come through 2019, which is an incredibly turbulent year for politics in general, with huge issues around climate change, people on the streets calling for emergency action that we were part of, and then the enormous threat of Brexit, which people seem to forget was absolutely dominating the build-up to the general election, the prorogation of Parliament, the absolute disdain for democracy that Boris Johnson had, and as a party we've withstood that year and come through it in better shape than all the other parties. And you say, so I've had 2 years. I've actually, 22 months before this re-election process started, and it's a super fast 22 months. And I think people have seen good things from me and Jonathan personally during that time, that we've helped the party to get over some very difficult times with absolutely huge success. Don't forget that the council elections in 2019, we elected more new councillors than in all the previous elections combined, that we managed to get MEPs elected in 4 new regions, and that is testament to the building up before I was co-leader, when Jonathan and Caroline were co-leader, of building up the field team and our capacity there. And now we're really ambitious for this election. We're on a complete mission because we are in the very fortunate position of being a united party, one that came out of 2019 up, and with the luxury of being able to say from a position of strength and stability, what can we add to what we are doing? There isn't a question of either or here in terms of trying to get more people elected or trying to make change happen now. We have to do both. There's an absolute imperative coming from the grassroots for us to do that, for us to work with them better, get more Greens elected, and when we're elected, work with them to make actual change happen. And I'm very, very excited to be at this point with the rest of you working as a team, ready to take us back to that next level. It's a very ambitious strategy Jonathan and I are putting forwards, and we really hope people will back us and will back that strategy to take the Greens onto much, much bigger things. The opportunity, the political space is really there right now.
Brilliant, thank you, Sian. And then finally, we're going to be going to Rosie for the opening question. So Rosie, your opening question is, you've only held elected office since 2019. As a relative newcomer to the front lines of the Green Party, why do you think you're ready to become party leader?
I think being party leader is a bit like being a parent, isn't it? I'm not sure anyone ever is ready until you've done it. But that said, I'm a fast learner. And in the year that I have been elected, I've made some real changes within my portfolio area. I took over as our group spokesperson for health and adult social care at the beginning of the year. And my approach to learning how to make change happen in that portfolio is to go around and to push everything and to see what moves. And sometimes taking a new set of eyes and a new approach to that, you discover things that you might not have found out if you learned how to do it the traditional way. So, I mean, one of the things I always say is the disadvantage of being new to something is you don't yet know what's not possible. But the advantage to being new to something is you don't yet know what's not possible. And I think sometimes not knowing what's not possible gives you ambition that you wouldn't necessarily have once you've been once you've had experience and you've become maybe a little bit more jaded with things. In terms of what I think I can bring to the role, I think I've had a long apprenticeship for politics. I think the other areas that I've done, the other fields that I've been involved in have taught me a lot of lessons and a lot of transferable skills, which I do think make a difference in my role as a politician. Again, I think it's one of those things that people don't necessarily trust career politicians, you know, people who come straight out of university and they want to go into politics. Sometimes having had some life experience first can give you a perspective that you wouldn't necessarily have just coming straight to it in the first place. And I think in my case particularly, I think some of the experiences I've had do make me a much better politician, and they give me both the skills but also a passion for making change, and for making change that matters to people's real lives, the problems that they face in everyday life, as well as the bigger structural problems and the systemic change that we need to look towards if we're going to address the climate crisis and the problems of inequality and poverty and social injustice that we're facing. I'll stop there for now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rosie, and thank you to all the candidates for their responses to those opening questions. We've now got a couple of questions that are going to be focused on elections, but before I move to those, I initially just wanted to welcome all the people who have been joining us throughout this on Facebook. If you stumbled across us by accident, you're currently watching Bright Green's Green Party leadership hustings. Please do stick with us for the duration. And if you are watching on Facebook, please do share this video so we can get more and more people watching it as well. We will be taking questions throughout from both the Zoom call, from the chat on there, and from the comments on the Facebook video. So if you do have any questions you want to put to the candidates, please submit them. Before we, there's nothing else before, I'm just going to move on to the next question. We're now going to move on to the question that has been pre-submitted by a number of people in various different iterations. And I'm sure the candidates will have been used to answering questions along these themes throughout these hustings so far. So the question comes in two parts. So was the 2019 electoral alliance with the Liberal Democrats and Plaid Cymru a mistake? And under what conditions, if any, would you enter an electoral pact with other parties at a future general election? And I'm going to start this one with Rosie.
So a mixed martial arts coach that I once worked with, he's got a saying that you win or you learn. And I think that's very relevant when it comes to this. I think worrying about whether or not it was a mistake, I think that's backward looking. What we need to look at is what we're going to do going forwards. I think at the time, I thought that we needed to do everything we could to try and prevent a Conservative government, both because of the situation we were in as a country at that point, and also because for the people who need it the most, the people who are the most vulnerable, and the people who are suffering from the most social injustice, they're the people who are going to be hurt the most by a Conservative government. So I did feel that we had an obligation to try to prevent that from happening. Now, looking back, I don't think it worked very well. And I think there are reasons why it didn't work very well. I think one of those reasons is that you can't really swap people's votes around like between political parties like they're trading cards. And people resent attempts to do that. I mean, this is something that we know. So again, it's always a question of trading off the risks and the benefits of doing something like that. I mean, there is always a cost to be paid in terms of political capital. And as things worked out, I'm not sure that that was the right trade-off. I think what we need to bear in mind is that we can't make a habit of this if we're going to be taken seriously as a political party. And that's the bottom line is at some stage we need to start standing on our own 2 feet and become a major political force in our own right, rather than expecting other parties to carry our cause for us. And I think what we found out now is that given what happened and given the absolute intransigence of the UK Labour Party, I think going forwards we need to start standing on our own 2 feet. As I said, we need to stop doing that. So I think whether it's a mistake or not, I think you can argue that, but I certainly think it's not something we should be doing in future.
Thanks, Rosie. So it's going to be Shahrar taking this question next.
Thanks, Chris. And it doesn't surprise me that this topic is coming up, and it has been throughout the campaign. And I think it's really important that voters, members and others understand what's been going wrong. So Rosie said just now about being backward looking. There's nothing backward looking about looking and understanding your mistakes and trying to learn from them. We don't yet have the election report, the official Green Party election report on how we did across the country. I'm hearing from members, especially coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, during this campaign, to tell me how aggrieved they feel. Now, I'm not saying that they're justified in their grievances, but local parties are really suffering. They're demoralized. Many of them felt that they weren't included in the decisions which were impacting their selections and their campaigns. And there's something very wrong in a party which prides itself on grassroots, devolved democracy, when our own local parties feel betrayed. That's not good enough. Now, in terms of learning from mistakes, and you may not even have been a member in 2017, but you can see what was going on in the Green Party. And I hope all our candidates will have seen how badly, dismally wrong the Progressive Alliance went in 2017. And we're supposed to be doing politics differently. And yet we've got all these behind the scenes, frankly, secret deals going on, quid pro quo without the quo on the other side. It's absolutely extraordinary. Even on the way that politics is normally done, we wouldn't have signed off on these agreements. So absolutely no to 2017, no to the 2019 Lib Dem Pacts. And in politics, and I hope I'm one of those in life as well, who learns from their mistakes. And this is despite the fact that I was arguing against those failed progressive alliances and pacts in 2017 and 2019. Why aren't our co-leaders, who were deeply implicated both times, arguing for it at conference? I know it was a conference decision, but they were pushing for it. They should be held accountable in this election for those bad mistakes, making it not once, but twice. In terms then of what I would be doing for the future of the Green Party. Again, there's this notion of, I heard a minute ago, the advantages of not knowing what's possible politically through a lack of experience. That's the wrong way around. The whole point about the Green Party's reason for existence is that we need to change what's politically possible, to do, in this case, what's scientifically necessary. The climate change emergency is upon us. We are not going to be constrained by the usual way of doing politics. We've become risk averse as a party in our messaging, in our boldness, even in the 2019 general election. Friends of the Earth, of all people, was ranking the Green Party below the Labour Party. That's incredulous. It's because we weren't bold enough. We weren't speaking with articulacy about how it is that we don't just want to put billions and trillions into renewables and retrofitting, but we want to change the whole economic system. Now, I think I've got a track record of dealing with hostile, difficult interviewers, even more hostile potentially than Green Party members. And I think you need somebody with the verve and the resolve to be able to answer intellectually and politically those difficult questions. We might even have a general election within the next 2 years. Anything can happen. We've been distracted, we've been caught on the hop, and we need to get this party back on track. And I think I'm the only candidate here to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Shahrar. And
can I just very quickly say something? I
was a member. It's very, very brief. Yeah.
I was a member in 2017, as Shahrar would know if he was paying attention.
Thanks, Rosie. And yes, we will have some time on this question, I think, to have some back and forth between candidates, because there's quite clearly some very strong disagreement. But before we do that, it's Sian to give her initial response, and then I'll come back to Rosie and Shahrar if they wish to respond in any way.
Yes. So, well, I mean, thank you for bringing this question up in the way that you have, because it's asking for, you know, the future as well as looking at the past. I do want to run through the history of this, and actually a couple of misconceptions in what Rosie's been saying, because since the 2015 election, which was the most disproportionate election we've ever seen, people have been on to first past the post and its failings, and they have been absolutely intent on tactical voting. Votes actually have never been more mobile than they are now. People are very willing to change their votes, and they're very susceptible to dodgy advice about tactical voting and what Labour try and do, which is the squeeze. Now, in 2017, we saw that. We absolutely saw Labour not wanting to talk to any other parties, pushing a massive squeeze. And actually, our local candidates and local parties were under a lot of pressure. They were facing a lot of bullying. And what we had at a national level was basically not a strong enough stance against standing down. So that's the position in which we went into an expected general election in 2019, which also had the absolute crisis of Brexit and democracy at its heart as well. So we had very, very difficult choices to make. On the one hand, if we left things as they were, we'd have all our candidates under the same kind of pressure, and now that pressure was also going to be coming from the Lib Dems, who were very ruthless at that kind of thing. We had the prospect of tactical voting, which had already been brought up during the European elections, which are proportional, for heaven's sake. So we knew that was going to be a problem. And so when we and Jonathan first became leaders, our first round of interviews was very much to firm up according to that first problem. We said there's absolutely no way we're standing down for anybody. Our candidates are going to stand firm, and anything that happens needs to be reciprocal and share an agreement made between parties. That's what we wanted to make our line be. And we'd actually inherited a policy that was more or less, we'll seek out agreements. We were saying, no, our door is closed. And then the other parties did come to us. And so this was very difficult for us, because it was offering something that might help the country. We had data, and this is again where Rosie isn't quite right. We had data showing very, very clearly that parties working together were more popular than those parties apart. And there was very strong data showing that if everybody had pulled together, including Labour, behind the others that were not Conservative, there would not be a Conservative government now. And Labour's failure to take the spirit of what we were doing on board and get involved is what led to the Conservative government that we have now, and all the problems that we have. But we did try to save effectively the country with this, and I think it was the right thing to do. And within the party, we did do it the right way. We asked members what they thought before we even went and talked to anybody when the idea was first put forwards in the media. We know that leaders can't dictate. We absolutely know that. Every single decision was made by the relevant bodies within the party about the arrangement as a whole, and by every single local party. And on both sides, on all sides, there were local parties from the Lib Dems, from the Greens, who said no. And that was absolutely the right way to do it, by doing it by democracy. So I stand by what we tried to do. And actually that thing about things being more popular when people team up than the parties apart is borne out by the data. There are bigger swings in seats that had Unite to Remain agreements to the relevant parties than there would have been from just transferring the votes. And I know that votes don't come across 100% between parties, but other people are attracted to the fact of the alliance. And that is just there in the data. The principle is proven. Now, next election, I think we have to start. No one knows the situation in the next election. We're going to be stuck with first past the post again. But you know, the Lib Dems aren't getting any better, and there's Labour shifting to the right. I cannot honestly see us wanting to do this again. And whatever, we don't set now what our strategy is going to be for the next election. That's a terrible strategy, is to set your strategy in advance and announce it. But I think our starting point again has to be, our door is closed. We have now come out of the 2019 election with a reputation for our candidates standing their ground, that we won't be pushed around, that if you want to come and talk to us, you have to offer us something in return. And I think that's worth having going into the next election, when this question of first past the post and tactical voting is not going to have gone away. So the fact that we stand firm has to be our starting point now, before any of that starts again. And I think this is right. I think this is the right advice to give to the party. It's advice that came back from the party. The party made this decision all together. And I think me and Jonathan and the rest of the leadership team, the elections team, the regional coordinators, everybody involved in this was doing their best for the party and for the country. And let's not forget that, sorry, I'm taking ages, Chris. Let's not forget that we also have, from this election, 15 second and third places around the country that are now our starting point for finding the next Brighton pavilions. And that is not to be sniffed at either.
Thank you, Sian. So I am going to give the other candidates a brief moment to come in on this, because I think this is going to be quite a fruitful discussion, and there's obviously a lot of constructive disagreement between the candidates on this issue. But before I do bring the candidates back in, I just wanted to say, for those of you who've recently joined us on Facebook, what you've stumbled across is the bright green hustings for the Green Party leadership election. Please do share this video and make sure as many people as possible can be watching it. We've got nearly 50 people on the Zoom call, and we've had over 20 watching us on Facebook as well, but we want to get more people seeing this so that everybody who is a Green Party member can hear about the candidates' views on electoral alliances and everything else we'll be covering this evening. So I'm going to go back in the same order again and let people respond to each of those points on this. But I would implore candidates to be quite significantly briefer than they were in their initial responses, if possible. And
I had a million points to rebut that, Chris. You had to let me do that.
I think, yeah, I'll give Rosie and Shahrar a little bit more time on these first two, but if we could keep it as concise as possible, that would be brilliant. And I'm going to come to Rosie first, and then Shahrar, and then I will let Sian back in at the end as well.
I don't actually disagree with a lot of what Sian's saying. I think we're maybe coming at this from slightly different angles, but I think there is a lot of common ground there. The point I would make is that things would have been very different had Labour been involved in that. And I think that would have made all the difference. Now, whether we ought to have predicted or not that they weren't going to play along, I mean, we know from history that UK Labour Party does not play well with other parties. So that was always likely to be a factor, I think. But I think the challenge was that asking many of our supporters to vote Lib Dem in some of those seats, that grated with a lot of people, I think. And that is something that it was part of the backlash against this deal. So for me, when I say you can't just trade voters between parties, again, I think sort of trying to tell our supporters who they should vote for, especially when the Lib Dems, again, with the history with austerity and knowing how that was going to play with some of our supporters, that was always going to be a bit challenging. But I do absolutely agree that the question is, you know, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do going forwards, rather than arguing over whether it is a good thing or a bad thing.
Thanks, Rosie, and thanks for your brevity. So I'm going to come back to Shahrar now, and then finally Sian, and we'll move on to a separate question.
Chris, I love the way you say, if you've stumbled across this Facebook Live, which is probably easier to do than a 9-digit Zoom password. Yeah, I'll be very quick. I just wanted to request here in front of everybody from Sian that she can commit to publishing the election report from the 2019 general election. That was from December. It's now July. And can we see it as voting members before the ballot begins? Because I think we need to know, we pride ourselves on transparency and accountability. There can be no accountability. You know, we might want to take your word for every little last detail, but I would rather see the report and make my own mind up, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Shahrar. Sian, did you want to come back on those points?
Yes, so I can clarify on the report. I know everyone wants to see our assessment of the election and what happened there, but the other parties have published theirs. We haven't just commissioned some expert to tell us what they think. We've actually held a series of meetings which are called after action reviews, involving all the different teams on all the different aspects of the election. And we had people helping us to do that, people who are mediators and all of those kinds of things. And they are writing the report now. We haven't got it back yet because of coronavirus, and so it doesn't exist. These assessments that we're making are some of the things that are published online that assess the effects of the Unite to Remain agreement. There's a review from the Unite to Remain organisation itself where you can see what happened in the different areas. But in terms of our own party sort of organisation, all the different strands within the organisation, the kind of report you've seen published by Labour and the Lib Dems, ours is not back yet. But I think the intention is, because I think some of the discussions that were had during the review days were about that, you know, how to make the thing learning, but also so that something we can show members. I think the intention is for members to see a report. Absolutely. So yeah, let me say yes. So Labour,
If you could be very brief on this now, Sian.
on the this is the real question here on Labour, because the idea was that we weren't going to have the snap election in December. We started talking to people in the summer, not expecting to have the election come so quickly, and it came really quickly, and there wasn't the amount of time to build up support for the idea, to get Labour members trying to sort of push it forwards as well. So rather, you know, suddenly we were forced into a final stretch where we did reach out to Labour, but they were not having any of it. And I think it is a big question whether Labour will see sense over this, over first past the post, because it's clear they applied every single squeeze that they could in that election to every single vote, and they still didn't win. And yet, if we still know that if they had worked with other parties, if they came behind PR, we wouldn't be in that situation. We'd be in New Zealand, and that's what we want to have here within the Green Party. We need to fight towards that kind of situation. So yeah, it is ultimately at Labour's door, and the next steps are ultimately at Labour's door as well, because I think our members are fed up with this kind of thing.
Thank you, Sian, and thank you to all the candidates on that question. And we are going to stick on the question of elections, but as some of the candidates have alluded to, it's better to be forward-looking than backward-looking, and so we're going to be moving forward and looking at a forward-looking question in a second. But before I do that, I just wanted to make a couple of shout-outs to people who have been wonderful on this call. Firstly, again, to the Blackpool Green Party folks who have, in the same as they did for the House of Lords husting last night, been very thoroughly sharing the live stream of this as far and wide as they can. Thank you for that, Blackpool Green Party folks. And for other people, why don't you try and rival Blackpool Green Party and share it further than they do? For the second shout out I just wanted to say is to the wonderful people who've donated to Bright Green throughout this call. You are fantastic. We really appreciate your donations. It means a huge deal to us. If you do want to donate, you can do so at bright-green.org/donate, and it will really help us to grow and strengthen in the future. Now, on to the next question, which again was pre-submitted, but there are some similar questions that I've seen in the chat as well. So this is another question on elections. So this question is relatively straightforward in terms of it's a relatively short question, so you don't have to remember much, but it's perhaps a more complicated one to answer. So this has come through from Nick Hartley and a bunch of other people. What is your strategy for winning over former Labour voters disenfranchised by the Labour Party? And I'm going to start with Sian on this one. And again, I'm going to encourage candidates to be as brief as possible.
Labour shifting to the right, Labour shifting to a more authoritarian position is genuinely just creating a huge amount of political space for the kind of politics that we are all about. I mean, if you looked at how Keir Starmer reacted to the toppling of the statue in Bristol by saying it was completely wrong and not going back on that, it left the mayor of Bristol in a terrible position, and it contradicted what the police had said, and was quite clearly just intended to try and appeal to more authoritarian, top-down people, law and order type people, even though the police are saying the other thing. This is quite clearly a new strategy from Labour, and although they're not changing their policies yet towards the centre, I can see this happening, and this is something the Greens have to be absolutely prepared for, because this is the part of our platform, me and Jonathan, that's all about making sure that we're being good allies and being that political voice in the room, helping the views of people who are fighting for justice, for human rights, for people who are left behind, for the precarious workers, the renters, to make sure that we're doing everything we can on climate change and being better allies to the green movement as well. This part of our platform of making sure that we're making change happen now on the ground is the next mass movement. And by this move to a more centrist, more authoritarian, less people-powered Labour Party, it leaves the people who can be the political wing of the next mass movement just us on the stage. And this is a huge opportunity that we cannot retreat into only doing the election politics, which I think is what Rosie is saying as part of her strategy to achieve. We have to be ambitious to be the political wing of the next mass movement, and this door is now open to us, and we helped to create the door, and it's now opening up to us to do so. Yeah, I'm super excited about this, and there is an awful lot of stuff in our platform about how we can better work with our allies, and it's something I've done in London since being elected in 2016. We ran our 2016 campaign very much on this theme. We spoke to a lot of campaigners, we spoke to people who've been working with on the ground in councils, and we got their ideas into the manifesto, radical ideas about renting, about giving people on estates a ballot. These came from the grassroots, these ideas, and then within City Hall, I've dedicated myself to getting the Mayor of London to adopt them, using the tactic not just of being in the room and asking questions, the being a politician in the big building tactics, but also mobilising the voices and bringing the voices of the people who are affected, who are campaigning outside of City Hall into the building, either through mass responses to consultations to force the mayor to change his mind. We managed to get 95% of the responses to the initial ballot policy to say, no, you must have a ballot for residents, when that wasn't even one of the questions. This is the kind of mass campaigning that we managed to do. But also, you know, people within Labour then sort of shifting and going, hang on a minute, this needs to happen. So that the mayor actually was making U-turns and getting parts of my manifesto as part of his policy. The same goes for rent controls, the same goes for action on youth services, which is another campaign that I've run as a politician from within City Hall, working with people who work in youth services. My part of it has been to put the evidence together. My part of it has been to do the request to councils, produce a report from City Hall that says, here are the cuts to youth services, and then people out there campaigning and campaigning until the mayor was forced to put tens of millions of pounds back in to really
start wrapping up, Sian. That'd be great.
And this, the other example, the example that's around the country that isn't just me and Caroline and City Hall, is the example of the climate emergency motions. And that is a real example of how Greens have managed to get themselves elected by campaigning, as well as the good that Greens can do by campaigning once elected. And this synergy, this working with people who are now having their backs turned on them by Labour, and actually making change happen within town halls, city halls and Parliament, is what our strategy is all about. And it's super exciting because we haven't been in a position to really expand into this area with our support, with our infrastructure as a party before. But now we do have those are the boring practical things like the infrastructure in HQ for local parties to use, but also
15 more seconds, Sian.
There's so much that we can do to get this sorted. So yeah, there you go. There's my plan. And if Labour are watching, watch out, go close the come back into our political space, or rather don't, you know.
Thanks, Sian. I'm going to bring Rosie in now on this question. We're going to, obviously Rosie and Shahrar, for this one, you can go as long as Sian just did, but for future ones, I am going to cut down the time a little bit so we can get through as many questions as possible. So Rosie, you're in next on this one.
I'm going to keep this simple, I think. I think the way we appeal to disillusioned Labour voters is the same way that we appeal to disillusioned Conservative voters, is the same way we appeal to Lib Dem voters, is the same way we appeal to non-voters. The way we appeal to voters is we talk about the issues that they care about. And I think there's a tendency to want to go out and talk to people about our priorities and the things that we care about, and to shout about the climate crisis and you know, the urgency of taking action and all of these things, which we know are very important. But actually, the way that you get people interested in what you're saying is to talk to them about what they want to talk about, and go out and find out what they want to talk about. And again, you know, issues about inequality, poverty, social justice, these are things that are core Green values, and we can be really strong on those. We can talk about what we're proposing to do there. Now, this issue about political space with Labour, I'm not that keen on that, because this focus on positioning ourselves relative to Labour gives Labour all the power. Because if Labour then move back to the left, does that mean we've then become redundant? Yeah, and clearly that's not the case, because I think we're different from Labour in many ways. It's not just about left or right, although that's obviously a factor, but there's also issues such as, you know, whether we believe, the fact that we believe in local grassroots democracy, and that focus on local communities and participatory democracy. Those are all things that are very Green. So I think we should focus on what makes us unique, not just what distinguishes us from Labour. And again, if we go out and we talk to people about their priorities, and we know this, as I say, I've learned about elections in Solihull, where we've got some of our most experienced campaigners in the Green Party. I've been lucky enough to learn from them. And we have the safest ward in the country in Solihull, safest Green ward in the country. Chelmsford Wood had 84% Green vote at the last local elections. Now, Chelmsley Wood is not a white middle class vegan hippie area. You know, it's a very working class area. I mean, some of it is in the most deprived 10% of the country, and we've been successful there. And I say we as a local party generally, we've been successful there by going out and engaging with those communities and talking to them about the things that they care about. And we can do the same anywhere in the country. So again, it's not about whether people are Labour voters or Conservative voters or whoever. When we go out and we speak to people about the issues that they care about, and we're strong about our values, which are shared by an awful lot of people, then they will vote for us, and we know this.
Brilliant, thank you, Rosie. And so finally on this one, Shahrar.
Thanks, Chris. I see members getting into a great deal of what I take to be consternation around this topic. How do we pitch ourselves? What is our political position, shall we say, on the left-right spectrum? Now, as deputy leader, I was up and down the country convincing voters from all different walks of life, all different cohorts, all different previous political party allegiances. Now, part of what Rosie said is absolutely right. We can and we do appeal to everybody. That's actually one of our unique strengths, because let's face it, what is the one thing that every person in the country should be able to revolve around, that only we are talking about, that is in their interest to know? It's the avoidance of the existential threat. It's universal death. If we can't get people revolving around that, then there's no hope for anybody, is there? And we always look beyond the immediate electoral cycle because we're long-termist and we're looking at science beyond the current electoral cycle. But where I beg to differ is that it is not the case that we should not be tailoring our messages to different people across that spectrum. And Labour right now is an open door for us, not only because of Starmer's election and the lurch towards the right, but and Sian said, if Labour are watching. Labour are watching, certainly on my timeline. Here's an example of a double spread sheet just in this weekend's paper. We are an eco-socialist party and we shouldn't shy away from that. In a left-leaning paper, Labour are listening. Labour are joining the party in order to vote for me, actually. Why is that? Because we should not be embarrassed or ashamed about describing ourselves as a socialist party. Maybe when we're not talking to Conservative voters, but when we're trying to attract and appeal to Labour voters, it is a nonsense to shy away from that term, because once again, we've become risk averse. Look through our manifestos recently. We are simply not making the case that we're a socialist party as if it's a dirty word. It is not a dirty word. It is something to be proud of. It is about equality. It is about saying that everybody in society has to have their basic needs met, whether it's health, education, or housing. I work in medical education and I've seen firsthand what is the impact upon BME key workers in particular. Often those communities who are at the sharp end on low wages in an institutionalized prejudicial environment, unable to say no to where is my PPE. And we need to be speaking out to those people, many of whom are currently voting Labour, and wrongly so. I launched the first BME manifesto in 2015. And I think we need to do more of that. So if you elect me, you're not just electing a change in the visible appearance of the Green Party. You are electing a change in how we do politics, to be bold and unashamed about appealing, yes, to socialist voters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shahrar, and to all of our candidates. So we're not going to have any back and forth on this question because I'm going to try and get through as many more as we possibly can. We have about 35 minutes left for questions, so I'm going to try and squeeze in as many as possible. So once more, I would plead for our candidates to be as brief and concise as possible. If you do have questions, please do pop them in the chat if you're on the Zoom call, or in the comment section on the Facebook video if you are watching on Facebook. We've got another question that is also about attracting a particular type of voter. In this instance, Georgia Nelson has asked, how will you personally attract more young voters and members to the party? And I'm going to start with Shahrar on this one.
Thanks very much for that. Let me just start by talking about the kinds of outreach which I'm currently engaged in. Here's an example. There is a brilliant organisation which is cross-party political called Uprising. And what they do is they reach out to predominantly BME youth to try and get them into politics, because they're often disappointed, disadvantaged, and feel that politics isn't for them. So I launched the environmental leadership campaign for Uprising just over a year ago. And it's absolutely terrific to see how the youth are politically engaged and motivated. And we need to be doing more of that, not just external outreach, but also internally in terms of mentorship. We have a fantastic Young Greens sub wing of the Green Party. And I would like to see everybody engaged in all the campaigns that each of our groups are doing, because I think that makes us united and that gives us drive. Because at the minute I see, unfortunately, siloed working across the Green Party. And as somebody who's done management, I have qualifications in management, you know, one of the things people often talk about is getting beyond those limitations of the boundaries which you will identify with. And I think the youth are, if you look at the wider world, they're the ones who really get it. I go into schools, I speak to school strikers, they're converging on Westminster, and they are being told in the most patronising fashion. Do you remember Theresa May, wasn't it? Go back to school, essentially. I mean, how deplorable is that? If the youth now, and I don't just mean votes at 16 and being able to stand for election, if they were in Parliament now, we would have a completely different environment, because they care. They're not just idealistic, they're realistic. Because the ultimate realism is to understand that we cannot go on business as usual. I was a founding signatory of the Extinction Rebellion petition in October 2018. Tell the truth, #1 aim. And actually, the Green Party is simply not punching above its weight here when we should be. We should be recognised as front and centre of that environmental ecological emergency campaign, and we're not, which is one of the reasons I felt I had to get involved in that campaigning way. So yes, absolutely, finally. We need to be engaging with the youth. They are where the action is right now in terms of system change. We need to be reaching out to them and vocalising and adding to their concerns. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Shahrar, there. And we're now going to go to Sian next on this question on attracting young members and voters to the Green Party.
So I think there's I've been making notes. I think there's three things I want to say about this, and I'll do it as briefly as I possibly can. I think in the first place, we need to be looking at the Young Greens organisation within the Green Party and giving it absolute full credit, far more autonomy, far more support and integration with the work that we do. If you look at what they've been doing over the past few years, the 30 under 30 scheme, which is a mentoring scheme and a training scheme, which I take part in, has brought forward some incredible people who are now standing for election, some of whom have started to get elected last year. And I'm sure actually we'd have seen more coming through in this year's cohort of councillors. They've been doing incredible training. They've been building up campaigning capacity already. And the work they've been doing during coronavirus, they were the first off the blocks with things like seminars like this. They invited me to talk about housing rights, but they also had incredible people like Assad from War on One, and people just genuinely doing a political education program. There's so much they are doing right, and they need to be listened to and empowered to carry on doing more of that within the Green Party. And I think it's, yeah, just fantastic. That is part of exactly what we need to do. And I think the young people out there in society are having the roughest time at the moment with all the the precarious work, the fact that they're much more likely to have lost their jobs as part of the coronavirus crisis, the fact that education's being disrupted, the fact that they still do not have the housing rights that they should have, or the rights to access things like council housing. There's incredible discrimination in benefits and pay towards young people. The fact that the issue they've been on the streets about most this year is in fact the climate emergency, something in the future. It breaks my heart. You know, they're an amazing generation, the young people of today, and I think it's so important that we all pay attention and empower them as much as possible. But they're getting some power, and let's not forget that the Wales election that's coming up next year includes votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. They will be voting for the people to go on the Senate and the government of Wales, and that is fantastic. So yes, we ought to be, as a Green Party, working on an important strategy for how we get people in Wales to vote for us who are 16 and 17. And again, just going back, reminding you of the way that I work in City Hall, it is very much going and listening to the younger generation. There's work that I'm doing at the moment about the lost generation. We're meeting with young people's groups. We're listening and finding every bit of data that we can about how they are suffering worse from the coronavirus crisis. And there'll be some strong proposals coming out that I hope will add to the constellation of work that's going on to try to make sure that we do not blight the lives of another generation, especially not one that cares so much about everyone's future.
Brilliant, thank you, Sian. And then to Rosie finally on this one.
I'm going to start by referring you back to my previous answer, in that when we want to attract a group of people, we go out and we talk to them about the things that they care about and the issues that are important to them. So in terms of attracting young people, it's looking at where our values intersect with the things that are important to that group. And as Sian's already identified, there's lots of areas where that intersection happens. You know, issues of social justice around work, around poverty, and also the climate crisis itself. When I was a general election candidate last year, my favourite hustings was the one we held at a sixth form college. And the young people there, I didn't have to sell anything to them because they were already on our side. They already believed in what I was saying. It was the easiest hustings of any of them. The question I ask is, why aren't they already voting Green? Yes. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and it's one of the things that led me to throw my name into the hat for the leadership contest. When I talk to people about why they don't vote Green, I get some very similar answers a lot of the time. And there's three big stereotypes I think really hurt us. There's the perception that we're a bunch of white middle-class hippies. Now, a lot of my friends are white middle-class hippies, but people who don't fit that profile sometimes think that we're not for them. They think that another party can represent them better. So that's one problem. Another problem is that they see us as a single issue party, and we're not always very vocal about the issues that may be affecting their lives. And then the third problem is that they think a Green vote is a wasted vote because we just can't win. And I think we have to address those barriers if we're to be serious about taking those votes and getting that support from that group. We need to convince them that we're an inclusive party, that anyone who shares our values can find a home here. We need to convince them that we can deal competently with a whole range of political issues. The climate and the environment, yes, absolutely, but everything else as well. And we need to convince them that we can be successful, that we can win. And those are the things that I think we need to address, not just to attract young people, but actually to attract everyone, but particularly with young people, because they already share our values so much of the time. So again, for me, the answer is we need to be serious about inclusion. We need to be serious about letting people know that they belong in the Green Party, whoever they are. We need to be serious about credibility. We need to let people know that we're competent and capable and that we're fit to govern. And we need to let people know that we're serious about winning elections and they should vote for us because it will make a difference.
Thank you, Rosie, and thank you for all the candidates on that question. Before we move on to our next question, welcome to all the people who've joined us recently on Facebook. You may well have stumbled across this by accident. If you had, you're currently watching Bright Green's hustings for the Green Party leadership. Please do share this video, comment on it, like it, so we can get it in more news feeds and more people will watch it. If you do have any questions for any of the candidates, we have just shy of half an hour left of questions. So if you would like to send anything in, please do pop them on the comments section of the Facebook video and we will try and come to them. So our next question is on the subject of climate change, which a lot of the candidates have been mentioning in their answers so far. This is coming from a number of different people submitted this in advance. And the question is, how can the Green Party best influence action on climate change over the next 12 months? And I'm going to start this question with Rosie.
So I think there's a lot of different answers to this. I mean, first of all, let's not forget that we have a lot of elected Greens. If you look at our local councillors, the local council base, and a lot of those local councillors are already working on these issues and working to influence what's going on in those local areas. So I know we've just taken over the Brighton and Hove Council, and there's some really exciting things going on down there, which we're watching closely, and we're hoping that Solihull's not going to be too far behind. And I think, I mean, we talk a lot about local politics and the importance of local politics in as part of that green philosophy, but sometimes we don't then follow that through to its logical conclusion, because sometimes I hear people sort of dismissing the importance of that local politics. And as Greens, we do really well locally. So I think that's something that we can absolutely follow through on. I mean, in Solihull, we have a Conservative administration, but we've managed to push them on the issue of climate change. It's got to the point where they're falling over themselves to try to be perceived as greener than the Greens. And it never works very well for them, but it's helped us to get things done that we wouldn't otherwise. And that's because they're worried that we're going to take their seats off them. They're worried that we're going to take their council off them. And so by being that credible threat, we've managed to get action. And I know this has been happening in lots of other areas all over the country. So we are already getting action directly. I think we can also put pressure on other parties. And again, we do that by being a credible threat to them and by getting out there and winning that argument. You know, the more credible we're perceived to be, the more backing our ideas have from experts, professionals, scientific consensus, the more that puts pressure on other parties to adopt our ideas. And again, you know, we've seen other parties recycling our policies. We approve of this. You know, Greens like recycling, even when it comes to policy. So there's lots of ways we can do that directly. We can also support other organisations. So groups like XR and Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace, and where our interests overlap with theirs in terms of preventing the climate crisis and in terms of protecting the environment, we can absolutely engage with them on that and work together. So I think there's lots of ways that we can do that. But for me, again, we're primarily a political party. We're a political organisation, and our role is to get Greens into positions of power where we can be at that table when those decisions are being made. And for me, that's what we should be focusing on. And we need to work together with the other organisations that make that wider movement. And they've got their own role to play in that as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rosie. And just before I was going to interrupt you to ask you to wrap up, so thank you for being concise. So Shahrar, you're next on this one.
Thanks, Chris. Before I start, I just had a joke for Rosie. You were saying that why is it that students in the schools are not voting Green? Well, surely it's because they're not old enough. But anyway, I wasn't sure.
Young people in general.
Oh, okay. All right, good. Now, we simply as a Green Party are not meeting the urgency of the climate emergency. And that's something that I want to change and to fix. My campaign slogan actually is Climate Justice Matters. And justice really is inextricably bound up with the climate emergency. We see now, today, right now, people are suffering the consequences of the West overconsumption, especially in the global South, whether rising sea levels in Bangladesh or the Maldives, glacier retreat, melting ice caps, drought, disease. These are all going to hit the poorest globally first, and those least able to afford the remedial action to deal with it. And that's a kind of a double injustice. And I think really that people need to have that explained, because Greens are internationalist, and people, I think, are crying out for a different kind of politics, more than just looking after number one. And there's a problem, isn't it? Because we keep talking about credibility, 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 credibility. I'm the credible candidate, this. I'm the credible candidate, that. It's not just about credibility. That's not ambitious enough, because guess what? If all people have to peg what's credible in politics is what's been going on in business as usual, then we're constraining ourselves. We need transformation. You might say, well, it's not credible to talk about moving our economic system to something which is pegged to the cost and the debt to the environment. But my answer to that is it's simply impossible to carry on business as usual. So instead of credibility, we should be talking about realism, which is why I'm saying we have to change what's politically possible to do what's scientifically necessary. So that's nothing to do with credibility, is it? Of course we can be credible, but we have to be realistic at the same time. So in terms of how do we build that movement, we need to keep talking about the truth. We need to stop being risk averse and worrying about what it is that people are going to be thinking if we say that. Are they going to be alarmed? Being alarmed is not the same, or causing people to be alarmed, is not the same as being alarmist. We're not being alarmist when we state the facts of our existence and our continued sleepwalking into climate oblivion. We're simply being objective. The facts are alarming. That doesn't make us alarmist. So I want us to shift direction. I want us to start vocalizing and speaking truth. I think the public are crying out for that, and we're simply not doing it. We've given it to Extinction Rebellion to do. We need to be doing that front and center of our climate emergency campaigns. Otherwise, there will be no tomorrow. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shahrar. And then finally on this one, Sian.
I mean, I think we at the big level, we've got the COP talks coming, and there's going to be the need for lots of getting together across the movement to make sure that there's sufficient pressure, sufficient public pressure and debate at the right level about what happens at that conference. It's absolutely vital that in the context of the special reports from the UN, that we actually do get the right targets put in place at an international level. But I want to go right back down to the practical now, because what we go into the next 12 months with on the ground is double the number of councillors, representation on 50 new councils, and hundreds of councils who've passed climate emergency motions and said that they will make a plan. And our job for the next 12 months has to be to make sure that those plans and ideas and targets turn into actual action. Now, I'm quite old, and in 2007 I wrote the foreword to the Mayor of London, this was Ken Livingstone at the Times, first climate strategy. That was in the days when the Greens had the deputy mayor in London, and Labour in general were a bit nicer to us. And so I was one of the people writing forwards, and I wrote in that forward, and in 2007 I wrote this, I've seen too many climate plans get put on a shelf and left to gather dust, and this must not happen again. And it must this time not happen again, because we have this absolute deadline. So we are in a really strong position to be able to make sure that the bottom up grassroots, the filling in parts of the easy bits of climate action are done at a local level. And there's enormous amounts of work going on at the moment within the Green Party, within the Association of Green Councillors. We have an excellent climate action coordinator who is finding the research, supplying local councillors with asks to make, because like Rosie says, in lots of councils, the councillors are turning around to our Greens and saying, okay then, so we made this promise, what are we going to put in our plan? And we're ready to give them those solutions. And there's some amazingly inspiring things that you can do at a local level, if that's following the lead of Andrew Cooper and making sure that we get free insulation and warmer homes works done on all those homes that have been left out so far. That's just an enormous amount of work that hasn't been done, and it can be started at a local level with things like revolving funds and support, and local councils are in a good position to lobby the government. And then the other big gap, and there's a fantastic report from the Centre for Renewable Energy, I think it's called, that came out just a couple of weeks ago, talking about how spatial planning and how we reorganise our towns and cities in terms of where things go and where people work and shop and all of that, is the absolute thing that will solve both the non-resilience that was evident in the coronavirus crisis and the climate crisis. And that puts forward the easy ask and revolutionary idea of taking the out-of-town shopping centres and turning those into housing and building up our high streets and our local high streets instead. And if that isn't a green campaign in the making, I don't know what is. So the opportunities are really there. We've got the infrastructure, we've got a lot of the councillors on the ground, and we will be needing to work with campaigners again, because as soon as any dust starts to gather on
start wrapping up, Sian.
Extinction Rebellion, the school strikers, and all the climate campaigners who've got those promises in the first place working with us are going to be needed to put pressure back on again.
Thanks, Sian, and thank you to all the candidates on that question. So we've got just shy of 20 minutes left. So if you have any burning questions for the candidates that you've always wanted to ask them but haven't yet, then please do pop them in the chat if you are on Zoom, and in the comments if you are on Facebook. We're going to try and squeeze as many in as possible. So my final reminder to candidates to be as brief as they possibly can. We are going to go to our next, which has been submitted by a huge number of people on this theme. So the question is, do you think that the Green Party needs a stronger class analysis? And what is your personal analysis of green politics and class? And we're going to start with Sian on this one. And again, for candidates, as brief as possible.
Okay, I'll be as brief as I can when I've been asked to provide a class analysis. I think we are in a different, like Rosie was sort of saying earlier on, we are different to Labour, and that we do not have the older class analysis that they developed. But what we have developed in our 40 years rather than 100 years is a very class-based analysis of where power should lie and where the decisions should be made. So it's not so much who controls the means of production from us, from a green frame, it's more who controls the use and the distribution of resources. But this to me is still very much a class analysis, and this is where we are very different from authoritarian Labour and where our values are very different. I'm very, very clear in what I say about putting power in the right people's hands. And I do detect something in some of what Rosie says that might be a little bit more top down than that, because I fight for people on housing estates, for example, to have a say about what option is taken when there's work needed on their homes, whether the Labour council, who's usually a Labour council, who's got consultants out and says, well, the experts say we're going to have to knock the whole thing down, and the residents go, is there not a refurbishment option that would make us not all homeless and reduce the amount of council housing in the area? And so evidence can definitely be contested. It is on rent controls, it is on policing a lot of the time, and the trump card in deciding which option to take, which route to go down when you're making policy in those areas, absolutely has to be about how decisions are made and where the power lies. So I want evidence, but I want the evidence to be transparent from the experts and used by people at the right level to make those decisions. And for me, that has to be at the lowest possible level, the closest to where the people making the decisions are going to be affected. And those decisions have to include, and this is why we talk about devolution quite a lot, that has to include the where how the resources are used, because that is a proper green analysis of class and power and where things lie.
Thank you, Sian, and really apologies for interrupting candidates, but want to try and squeeze in some more questions. So I'm going to bring in Rosie now on this one.
This is a really good question, because I think social class has changed considerably over the last few decades. And what we've got today is not the same division by social class that were the case for much of the 20th century. So again, I mean, this is one of my issues with when we start talking about socialism, because everyone has different understandings of what socialism means. And I'm not always convinced that that is the best use of our political capital, is having that debate about, well, what exactly do you mean by socialism? I mean, it gets used to refer to everything left of Genghis Khan, I think, sometimes. Actually, when we're talking about it as a political philosophy, I think there are different ways of addressing the problems of inequality and problems of poverty and those differences of class. So, I mean, for me, I have a very strong focus on inequality. It's something I talk about a lot in my role as health and adult social care spokesperson. And that's because the effect that inequality has is spread across all different areas of life. I mean, in my portfolio, we're looking at a 12-year life expectancy gap between different wards in the same borough. But you also got differences in terms of education, in terms of criminal behaviour, in terms of this quality of life, levels of trust in the community. There's so many different things that are affected by that inequality. And again, you know, we're looking at inequality across different dimensions. So you've got the economic, financial, but there's also educational outcomes. And we know that education affects many of these things. So it's multidimensional. And I think we need to look, when we're talking about inequality in the 21st century, we need to look across all of those different dimensions and how they're affected by it. Now, in terms of...
Start wrapping up.
I just want to say a few quick things about what Sian said about evidence and what Shahrar said previously about credibility, because I don't think we're using these words in the same way. I mean, for me, evidence is how you do something. The question of what you should do or why is often a question about values. And our role as politicians is to put those two things together. So we take the why from our values, and then the evidence tells us, well, if you do this, then this is the outcome you expect to get. And again, when we're talking about credibility, it's about having the evidence to back up what you're doing, making the numbers add up. And again, part of the problem that we've got is that when you look closely at some of what we do,
15 more seconds.
Those numbers don't add up. And that's something that I want to challenge. I want to make sure they add up better. Again, I haven't got time to go into the details now, but you can challenge me about that another time.
Thanks, Rosie, and apologies again for interrupting. Lastly, to Shahrar on this question about class.
Thanks, Chris. Again, we need to be talking to people in the terms that they understand. And that means acknowledging that class exists and discrimination on the basis of class exists. And these are key people in society that we need to be reaching out to. I heard one of the deputy leader candidates, actually, Cleo, talking about shouldn't class be one of the protected characteristics in the Equality Act? And I think that's a very interesting notion. I'm not sure I would go that far, because class is something which we can fix. It's not something you are born into. It's something that, not intrinsically, it's something in society which we should be able to fix and make the world a more fair society. So I spend many times, and I know other candidates will hear as well, speak to unions, engage with them, show solidarity on picket lines, whether it's firefighters or postal workers. We actually fight the corner of the working person. And I think it's imperative that we need to be able to speak in their language, and that we continue to do that in the best tradition of the Green Party. There was a comment which was addressed to me in the question. There's not an opportunity to take that.
I wasn't going to bring that in if that's okay, because the question is largely about anti-Semitism, but what I would say is that I would implore people in the chat if they could not make kind of abusive comments about candidates.
I would just like to say one thing about that, though. You can see that the Green Party has issued a public statement about that a while ago, and they've dismissed that complaint. And yeah, it's pretty horrific, actually, to have a party member sponsor a disreputable complaint against another member with a track record of 18 years on the basis of a speech which was cleared by the party. But you can look into that in your own time. That question can't be answered in full here. Thanks,
Shahrar. Okay, so we've got just under 10 minutes left for questions. And I'm going to take, I think, 2 final questions, and we're kind of towards the end. Imagine you're watching Question Time. We're kind of towards the end of the show, so we're getting to the more fun questions, which hopefully will also mean that you can do slightly briefer answers. So the first one is a mixture between a fun one and a serious one. So this one is, if you were to become Prime Minister tomorrow morning, what one policy, and you're only allowed one, would you change immediately, and why? And we're going to Shahrar first on this one.
If I were in government today?
I think it's tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning.
Which one policy? Well, that's easy, isn't it? Because one of the things I would want to change is the Prime Minister. And you're saying that I would already have that? Well, the thing is about Greens in government is that often when I've organised full slates in local councils and candidates have said to me, I'm really worried that I'm going to win. And I say, don't worry, because if you get in, many of us will be getting at the same time. And even if you didn't have time to do the job, you'll be a darn sight better than this lot, even by doing nothing. Now, I wouldn't be doing nothing. I would be saying that we need to ratchet up every single policy in life, in government, so that it's linked to the climate emergency. We're going to have 8, 9, 10 million jobs unemployment and counting because of the post-COVID situation. We need to be talking about the Green New Deal. We need to be articulating the sea change that's required, not just in terms of trillions of pounds, but actually a carbon-pegged currency. We need to be completely halting nuclear power generation. We need to be reversing all the armaments that we're producing, and we need to turn that industrial revolution into a green revolution, where people are reskilled and upskilled so that we're producing renewable energy like there's no tomorrow. So there's plenty of things to be doing. And if I were in government as Prime Minister, I would be hopeful also that there'd be hundreds of MPs alongside me in order to be able to do that important work.
Thank you, Shahrar. So Sian, you're going next on this one. So if you became Prime Minister tomorrow morning, what one policy would you change and why?
I'm going to try and answer this in the spirit which it was intended and name one policy, which is cancel the road building programme, because I bear the biggest grudge against the road building programme. I spent years as a road campaigner trying to support people around the country, just trying to stop new bypasses and new motorways and things from going, just not only ruining their countryside, but ruining the prospects for a decent transport policy in their area with all their induced traffic. So I'd cancel everything that's in the road building programme, pretty much no matter where it had got to, but particularly the one that's going to destroy Stonehenge, which is just offensive.
Brilliant, thank you, Sian. And then finally, Rosie, on this, if you became Prime Minister tomorrow morning, what one policy would you change and why?
I'd introduce PR. Because I think everything else follows from that. And having a better voting system, it's not just because it would get more Greens elected, although it would, but actually it would change the whole political discourse in this country. And a lot of what is wrong with politics as we do it, and political discourse, and the toxic atmosphere around politics that keeps so many good people out of politics, a lot of that can be traced back to our first past the post electoral system. So I think it would change the tone of discussion, and it would enable us to have better debates, and better ideas would come out of that. In terms of, somebody said in the chat, what kind of PR? I think we can have a discussion about which would be the best kind of PR. I think there are pros and cons of different systems. You can make the argument for for various different systems. What isn't controversial is that first past the post is the worst of all possible systems. So I think almost anything would be better. So I think that would be the one thing that I would want to change. And then I would hope that everything else would follow from that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rosie. So one final thing before I ask this final question is you've all behaved brilliantly in the chat on the Zoom call thus far in the call and have only used it for questions. In the last couple of minutes, you've really let your behaviour slip and I am not happy. So imagine you're in a real life hustings. You wouldn't shout out your every thought into the room, so please don't shout out your every thought into the chat. In particular, I would really appreciate it if people could not level accusations to leadership candidates that they are not able to respond to. With that behind us, we've got one final question, and in this leadership campaign, there have been loads of really fun questions that have come towards the end of hustings. We've had candidates being asked their favourite biscuit, their favourite packet of crisps, what present they give to each other, but I think we have one today which is my favourite so far, and this comes in from Marilyn. So Marilyn asks, what is your favourite TV dinner? And in front of what TV show, i.e. what is your favourite TV show? And I'm going to go to Rosie first on this one.
I hate this question. I'm really bad at this because I don't watch a lot of television. The last TV show I binge watched was Being Human, which I enjoyed very much, but I haven't had time to sit down with anything since then. In terms of favourite TV dinner, a good quality Chinese takeaway would be my go-to, but it has to be a good one.
Brilliant, thanks Rosie. So now on to Shahrar for your favourite TV dinner and favourite TV show to eat it in front of.
Thanks. So I'm not a great fan of bringing the food into the living area. So because we like to eat as a family and we cook some wholesome food sometimes from our vegetable patch, and we quite enjoy doing that. In terms of TV, yes, I think it's a good release. Sometimes a bit of escapism isn't a bad thing. A couple of things that I watched recently on Netflix were Chernobyl, which is an extraordinary documentary which really cuts to the heart of some of the environmental devastation and long-term impact on human beings that a radioactive release can cause, and that's why we need to be totally opposed to nuclear power. And finally, there was a series which I hope they'll run again or do another one of, Lie to Me with Tim Roth, which is absolutely brilliant. My PhD was a theory of intentional deception and lying, which I think gives me a little bit of an edge in terms of spotting deception in real life, and it's quite useful. Not to be able to perpetrate lies, of course, but able to spot them in others in politics. I think that's quite a good skill. But that program, Lie to Me, is actually based on theories of Professor Ekman. He's talking about things that you can spot in the face, actually, that can give you a clue when somebody's trying to conceal what their real thought is. And it's really, really good documentary, entertaining series, Lie to Me. Yeah, cheers.
Brilliant, thanks Shahrar. And then the last word on the TV dinner and favourite TV show goes to Sian.
Okay, I've got to be honest about my food choices, and none of them turn out to be vegan, but there you go. I will have to say macaroni cheese because it's so nice. And the thing I've been watching that I couldn't put down, and it was Mrs. America on the BBC, which is about the second wave feminist struggles to get laws through. So obviously I can relate to that. But the interesting thing is, the reason I watched it is because every woman I know who's not involved in politics told me to watch it before I watched it. They wanted to know if I'd seen it. And I think it's really good because that is actually very real about how change happens and how change can be frustrated, and how when you think you're winning there might be a backlash, and how you have to get on with your allies. And I think it's very educational for people who want to make change happen, that programme, as well as being about feminists. So that was nice too.
Brilliant, thank you Sian, and thank you to all of our candidates for their responses, and thank you to everyone who's attended this evening, both on the Zoom call and on Facebook. That is unfortunately all we've got time for this evening, but I wanted to just say a massive thank you to the candidates for the firstly, for this being about the 100th hustings they've had to do in this campaign so far, and they must be absolutely exhausted, and they still managed to be coherent and compelling. And I hope that they have helped you to make an informed choice in the leadership election this year. I have a couple of really quick final things to say before I let you all go off and enjoy your evenings. So this was one of 3 hustings that the Bright Green have hosted. We held one for the deputy leadership and for the House of Lords elections. We've also been running a huge number of interviews with candidates for the Green Party executive, with the leadership candidates, the deputy leadership candidates as well, which are available on our website at bright-green.org, and there are still more to come. So please go and check out all the coverage that we've been doing of these elections if you can. Where you will find all of those things is on our social media channels. So I'm going to pop a quick few links in the chat and in the comment section on Facebook. Please do follow us so that you can stay updated with everything that we do. And finally, the last thing I wanted to say is just to say that, as I said at the beginning of this call, Bright Green is an independent media outlet. We don't have big money or billionaire backers. We really rely on small donations from all of our readers and supporters. So if you've enjoyed this event, if it's been valuable to you, if it's helped you to understand who you want to vote for, then I would really please encourage you, if you are able to make a small contribution to Bright Green. And thank you to all of those who have done so on this call already. So there is one final link going in the chat and into the Facebook comments now. And with that, I just wanted to say a massive thank you again to our candidates for sticking out to the end, and for all of you for sticking out to the end who have attended. And please, everyone, who, if you are a member of the Green Party, do make sure that you vote in these elections. The voting will be open on the 3rd of August and will be open throughout the whole of August. If you're not a member of the Green Party, I believe there is still time to join. So join the Green Party and have your vote and give your vote to one of these candidates, or the 4th candidate in this election, which is of course reopen nominations if you wish to. That's all for me. That's all from this hustings. A massive thank you to all of you for coming, and I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you, Chris, for chairing.
Great job, Chris. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.